Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies, which is every year. I'm Josh Bell, film critic and writer, and I am joined by my co-host.
I'm Jason Harris, filmmaker, comedian, and fine, I'll bend over so you can cane me again.
Oh, yeah. I feel like the dynamic here would probably be the opposite, right?
Well, that's what we're doing. We're upending expectations, Josh. You know, it's you who's the whip here, who's caning me, just a lowly junior, just trying to make it through with my friends, my outcast friends, and an ending that might have been funny in '68, but is a little too realistic today, I'd say.
Yeah, so what's going on there in this episode of our season on the films of 1969?
Not 68.
Not 68. Although this movie did have it's considered a 1968 movie in some places because it did have some kind of premiere in 1968, but it was the Cannes Film Festival Palme d'Or winner in 19.
I got you, Josh. It was the Cannes Festival Palme d'Or winner in 1969, which is the season of Awesome Movie Year we're on now. So by process of elimination, we're doing this episode on this film because it won the Palme d'Or in 1969.
Thank you, Jason. And it is If, from director Lindsay Anderson, his second film, and the screen debut of Malcolm McDowell, who plays Mick Travis, the main character. But this is really a big ensemble. It takes a while, I think, for us to really hone in on the idea that Mick Travis is the main character. He's one of many students at college, the school that this movie takes place at. College.
Which is a high school, I think.
Yeah, in the UK, I believe college is a term that they use for what we call high schools. And when they go to what we call college, they just call it university. So yeah, these are like 17, 18-year-olds and some younger than that who are at this boarding school, and they don't treat each other very well.
I mean, lots of, Dave, if we were breaking it apart, lots of holdovers and Wonder Boys vibes, lots of stuff like this. But Josh, this is what is so cool about this podcast called Awesome Movie Year is like, I don't think I would have ever seen this movie if not for us doing this. I mean, Oh Lucky Man, another Lindsay Anderson movie, and This Sporting Life were both kind of on my radar, but I didn't even know about this movie, and it was a delightful find.
Yeah, I mean, I did know about the movie, and I think it's something that I thought I ought to see, but definitely had not gotten around to it, and this was a good impetus, and I had not seen other Lindsay Anderson films, so it was certainly highly acclaimed, though, at the time. Again, won that Palme d'Or and continues to be well regarded. And Lindsay Anderson overall, I think his reputation has maybe grown a bit since he passed away. I want to, though, dispute slightly your characterization of the vibes here, like the Holdovers and Wonder Boys, which to me are very nostalgic tinted, like wistful sorts of movies about Wonder Boys is about university life, and the Holdovers in a similar kind of high school boarding school. But to me, even before we get to that very violent finale that you alluded to, this does not seem like this is a very, very unpleasant place. And this does not seem like a positive depiction in any way of being at a school like this.
Welcome to the dollhouse. Is that a little more apt for you?
Yeah, I mean, getting into the the legacy, I noted down a film that we have done an episode on that also won the Cannes Palme d'Or, which was Gus Van Sant's Elephant, and that seemed to me to be a much stronger connection.
This is a way different tone. There's a lot of humor in this and absurdism, and that one is just hard to watch.
There's more humor and absurdism here, but I found this just as bleak in terms of its conclusions and its depiction of this world.
Yeah, I mean, it's a similar ending, right? So
it is, yes, and the way that it builds very, very slowly to that. So at the same time, this was a successful film. It grossed $2.3 million on its budget of just $500,000. Won that Palme d'Or at Cannes. It was nominated for 2 BAFTAs for Best Director and for Best Screenplay. it was nominated for the Golden Globe for an award that no longer exists, the Best English Language Foreign Film, which I guess was just an award for like British and Australian movies or Canadian movies, maybe.
I mean, you could make a English language film in Luxembourg if you want, and submit it, I guess. So.
You could, yeah, but that's not something we give out. But yeah, and interestingly, I don't know if I actually grabbed these segments, but a lot of these reviews that I looked at mentioned the idea that this was this big sensation, and especially the way that it connected to the counterculture and to the youth culture of the time, which makes sense because this is coming off of 1968, as we said, the summer
of Love is 69.
You're right. But campus protests and things like that were going on around this time.
Right. And, Josh, just to let the audience know, we're American. So maybe we don't know as much of what was going on in Britain at the time. Although I read a very difficult British history book. I took British history in college, and I read one on my own a few years ago called Island Stories. And it was all about how Great Britain as an island relates to the rest of the world. It was like, I minored in history, and this was a hard book for me to get through. This has nothing to do with this episode, but I just want you to know I know how to read.
Yeah. Jason read a history book.
I read a lot of history books.
Yeah. Of course. I haven't read any history books since leaving school, so you're ahead of me on that one. But no, I mean, I think when I was saying campus protests, I'm talking about protests that happened in the United States and protests against Vietnam and things like that were going on here as well as in the UK. I did think watching this movie that there were some elements to it that maybe are lost on me, at least as an American, in terms of the British school system and stuff like that. But as far as the counterculture goes and protests and things like that, it was very much something happening in the US and something mentioned by American critics as well as in the UK.
I think so, Josh. And I'm going to lend you that book, and then you can read it and rewatch this movie and get a greater tapestry of what's going on.
I mean, use it to kill bugs or something. So, yeah, critics were mostly positive, although, again, a bit, these crotchety critics may be a bit skeptical about the youth culture aspect. Vincent Canby in the New York Times said, "If is so good and strong that even those things in the movie that strike me as being first-class mistakes are of more interest than entire movies made by smoothly consistent, lesser directors. Lindsay Anderson's second feature is a very human, very British social comedy that aspires to the cool, anarchic grandeur of Godard movies like Band of Outsiders and La Chinoise. I can't quarrel with the aim of Anderson and David Sherwin, who wrote the screenplay, to turn the public school into the private metaphor, only with the apparent attempt to equate this sort of lethal protest with what's been happening on real-life campuses around the world. Revolution as a lifestyle, as an end in itself, is the fundamental form of La Chinoise, but it's confusing and too grotesque to have real meaning attached to what is otherwise a beautifully and solidly constructed satire."
So Sherwin collaborated with Anderson on a number of films. They were nominated for a BAFTA for Oh Lucky Man. And they also did Britannia Hospital, which is a trilogy, Josh, featuring lead character Mick Travis. Although I watched Oh Lucky Man, and he's got the same name, and they reference him getting kicked out of school. But like, that is the only thing that connects the two. Like, it's very strange. It's like if, you made an Ernest movie and never referenced that he went to camp, Josh.
How could you? Yeah, I mean, I didn't watch that movie or the third one, Britannia Hospital, but from reading, it sounds like it's more just the idea that they made these three movies together and they happen to name the lead character the same name, and they don't necessarily have this narrative continuity to them.
Right, and they have the same actor, Malcolm McDowell. But
right.
What happened was, like I said, I knew this Sporting Life and I had known Oh Lucky Man, but I didn't know this. And what I found was, like, this filmmaker, Lindsay Anderson, is so interesting. It just made me want to watch more of his stuff. So, that's a good sign for him.
Yeah. So, I mean, did you feel like the aspect of real world social commentary was ill-fitting here, like he's mentioning?
No, I mean, look, it's, it's right at the beginning. I thought the Godard comparison was fair. And, we're talking about 69. So we're in the middle of the French New Wave, moving into the, kind of Hollywood, New Hollywood. And this is part of the British New Wave. So I think it all fits. I think like more than that, what it's really showing is like a filmmaker in regards to like comparing it to the French New Wave, who's playing with tones and like seriousness versus absurdity and kind of real world versus fictional stuff. Like, I don't know. It was an interesting film, I felt, Josh.
Yeah, I agree. I think maybe if you're coming into this movie not aware that something shocking is going to come at the end, which I think at least I was, for whatever reason, expecting, then and people, these critics wouldn't maybe have expected that because there's not the same level of information available to them. It might seem a little more jarring. I don't know. But I figured since Lindsay Anderson himself is a one-time critic turned filmmaker, get another critic turned filmmaker's perspective. So Paul Schrader in the Los Angeles Free Press said, attempting to be a poet of violence, Anderson aspired to one of the highest echelons of film art, now sparsely populated by men like Vigo, Buñuel, Godard. Unfortunately, Anderson's surrealistic details miss the mark. We don't know what to make of these poetic intrusions. They don't fit into the film Anderson had been making thus far. The viewer doesn't suspect Anderson of pretentiousness, just of confusion. Anderson's poetry creates bafflement rather than involvement. Anderson's inability to pull off his grand poetic ambition brings the rest of the film crashing down on itself. After Anderson has made a play for the Gold Cup and failed, the minor rewards of If seem inadequate. There is an acute sense of disappointment about If, not only over the great film Anderson failed to create, but also the lesser films he passed by.
So I agree with him on the idea of it's just like all these surreal elements kind of come out of nowhere. But having watched Oh Lucky Man, I'm like, oh, that's just Lindsay Anderson. And if we don't necessarily know exactly what he's going for, he certainly does. So I just kind of like, I'm watching it, and baffling is a good word. I'm like, what? Huh? But then it's like, it's not like bad. It doesn't take you out of it. It just kind of draws you in more with all that stuff.
Yeah, I guess I'm kind of in the middle on that. I agree with you that he's definitely aiming for something and doing these things on purpose. Although I did see that one of the things this movie does is it switches back and forth between color and black and white, and that began because when they were shooting scenes in the chapel, they weren't able to light them for color. They didn't have the time for that. So they decided to shoot in black and white. And then Lindsay Anderson thought, oh, wait, what if we shoot some other scenes in black and white and switch those up? So it's kind of a practical consideration as well as an artistic decision. But I think once he's got that in mind, he is doing it deliberately and thinking about it. But I also think that I'm a little with Schrader, is that the more it sort of drifted away from recognizable reality and this sort of slice of life story about what it's like being at a school like this, the less engaging it was for me.
So I'm okay with that. I also found that in my research about the black and white, but it said that they did that at first, like you said, because of practical concerns. But then as they were watching it, they were like, hey, this works. This adds a textural element to what we're trying to tell as storytellers. So I think, for them, it was, some like one of those happy accidents of film that they thought added to the overall storytelling.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And there's certainly far more scenes in black and white other than in the chapel where they would have done it more deliberately. But it definitely was. I will say the first time it switches to black and white, which is a scene of this young new teacher arriving at the school and they're showing him his like crappy little attic room. I was so confused because it seemed like I was suddenly watching a different movie. Not only is it in black and white, it's like this adult character that I haven't seen before. And I almost was like, are these characters watching, like, are we going to see that they're watching this movie or something? And it was very disorienting for me, at least at first.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, look, at the beginning, we're seeing all these like younger students, like I guess it would be freshmen. and then they just kind of disappear. Like we don't really ever see them mostly after their stories conclude, like maybe midway through. So it maybe is a little messy, but again, he just feels like a chaotic filmmaker who, and we've talked about some of them, who, how do they make their movies and how do they turn in something unique? And I mean, Oh Lucky Man's the same, dude. Like there's a band, the Alan Price Band. And after every few segments, they just cut back to this band, like in the studio singing a song about the movie. And you're like, this is so indulgent. And that movie's 3 hours long and easily does not have to be, but you're like, this is just this dude. This is what he's doing, man. Like I'm not going to say it's not surreal or like David Lynch, but I feel like there is a thought process in his head where it all connects like in that same way. Like I don't understand everything David Lynch does. Obviously he's a master and I love him, but like whether I understand it all or not, I love watching those movies.
Right. Yeah. And I don't disagree that Anderson has a handle on what he's trying to do. But I think it just didn't always come across to me. So I figured also good to get a British perspective on this film. So
what's all this then?
I'm not going to do the accent. Penelope Houston in The Spectator said, "What makes the first half of If so compelling is less its detail, though much of that is striking, than its mood. The fusion of thwarted anger at the grosser practices of delegated authority with a real affection. This, though, gets the film only halfway. The revolution is yet to come. There can hardly be a child who hasn't at some time contemplated the enticing prospect of a school holocaust. Here is the wistful fantasy enacted. And it isn't surprising that David Sherwin and John Howlett devised the original 10 years ago while still in their teens. But with the journey into town to pinch the motorbike, some sense of a world outside has crept into the picture and the involving isolation is broken. The revolution is elsewhere. The enclosed exactitude of the film's first half has gone, and the faded authority symbols now imported seem to belong, as perhaps authority symbols always do, in a context of the director's own adolescence."
Yeah, so with that, Josh, the headmaster here was like an interesting character to me because he was so sympathetic, right? Like he wasn't like this stern taskmaster that you would especially expect in a school like this, in a film like this, right? Where you're talking about, this look back and how terrible it was. And even though the headmaster is one of these kind of empathizers to them, they still do him in the end.
Yeah, I mean, I think to me, it wasn't that he was sympathetic. It was that he and basically all of the supposed adult authority figures were ineffectual, and they allowed the whips, right, the older boys who have their own little positions of authority to sort of run free and abuse the younger boys, or just the boys who don't have that position of authority like Mick and his friends. And it's not that they were sympathetic or even that they cared about the students of any kind. They just kind of, all they care about is the institution, right? And that's what we get in these big speeches at the end of the movie. So I don't know. I didn't find any of those like adult characters, I didn't find them sympathetic to me as a viewer. And it didn't seem to me like they had any sympathy for the kid characters either.
Well, I'm going to disagree, just going back to the headmaster, because, as we see like the character in, when these guys finally get to class, right? And the headmaster's leading his group outside and telling them about, how they can be productive members of society and how important they are to the world. I do feel like he cares, but
that to me sounded like just empty nonsense when he was saying that.
Dave, what did you think?
I'm kind of with Jason on this one, honestly. Like, I don't know. I just didn't think it seemed that bad.
You're a real smug son of a bitch, Josh.
Do you want to attend this school, Dave? Would you have wanted to go there?
I don't want to attend any school.
Yeah, especially in all boys.
But does this not seem like a worse school to attend than some other schools?
I mean, Josh,
Eh.
we went to a school like this in some ways, didn't we? Our high
In
school
some ways, but as much as I was frustrated by many aspects of our school experience, I would take that easily over
you
this
were
place.
never, you were never bullied or anything like that. And if you were, I would have handled it for
Oh, well,
you,
thank
buddy.
you. But no, I mean, I was bullied elsewhere, like at other schools earlier on. So, yeah, but I mean, even aside from the bullying, which exists everywhere, right? The idea is that this is sort of institutionally set up to encourage bullying, right? That they give the worst
the power.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. Elsewhere in that Spectator article, Penelope Houston sort of waxes rhapsodic about her own experience at a girls' school and how, similar it was. And the idea that this could make you nostalgic for your school experience is just completely alien to me.
But Josh, you as someone who loves latent homosexuality in film,
it's not latent. It's definitely not latent.
There's that sequence with the gymnast and the student watching it, and I'm like, oh man, Josh is sopping it up right now, baby.
I mean, and then later they're like in bed together, and there's a whole discussion about how the whips. Another thing that they do is that they use the scum, right? The younger students that are their servants, essentially, to like sexually service them. So it's very, very much out there.
I told you, it's a strange piece, that's for certain.
Yeah, but I mean, I feel like that's probably also something that, I mean, none of us went to all boys schools, but I feel like that is something that comes up in those places.
No, it's funny because in my act sometimes, Josh, I do this joke where I said, the original joke was, I slept with one of my teachers in high school. It wasn't a big deal. Of course, I was homeschooled, right? So that was the joke. And then someone told me, oh, Daniel Tosh does that joke. So I changed it to, I could get any piece of ass I wanted in high school. Of course, I went to an all boys school, and that, is a little more in line with this film, I'd say, Josh.
Right. I mean, and they essentially are bragging in a way about which of these young boys they've gotten for themselves. And there's a scene where one of the whips kind of gifts this desirable young boy to one of the other ones and expects gratitude. So
do you think like 20 to 30 years from now, those whips were like, remember the good old days when we were trading sex slaves at boarding school?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the thing here too, and we see that in the scene at the end where all of these adults come for Founders Day or whatever it's called, including this general who's the father of one of the students. And, these are the people who then go on to be in positions of power, and they're continuing the idea of abusing their underlings and taking advantage and all that stuff. And that's how this whole system perpetuates. I think that's part of the point here.
Yeah, but I also would go back to the headmaster and say that there are both good and bad apples, Josh.
I did not see the headmaster as a good apple in any way. But
you have a visceral reaction because of your relationship with Mr. Richardson, our headmaster in high school. But.
He was not a good apple either. But so we had not, any of us, I think, seen, as Jason, as you said, seen this film or any Lindsay Anderson films.
No, I knew about this Sporting Life, like I said, and Oh Lucky Man was on my watch list, but not having known that it was related to this film. But I like Lindsay Anderson. I watched those two, and I'm going to watch more. I like them.
Yeah, and Dave, you hadn't seen this one, or?
Nope, hadn't heard of it or anything.
I actually seen a much later Lindsay Anderson film called The Whales of August, which is very, very, very different from this, and does not seem like his vision at all that I watched because I had a project of watching every Bette Davis movie, and it's one of the last movies that she was ever in. And so definitely it's this very like kind of cozy old lady sitting on a porch kind of drama, and surprising that it was directed by Lindsay Anderson.
Was it good? That sounds like it could be good.
Yeah, I think it was all right. I saw it a long time ago, but it's Bette Davis and Lillian Gish both at the end of their lives / careers, and I think it's more like a look at these, great old movie stars who are still here rather than that it's a great movie. But
that's kind of cool.
Yeah. No, it is. So anything else you want to mention about the background of this film, Jason?
Josh, Malcolm McDowell made a movie shortly after this called, I don't know if you've ever heard of it, A Clockwork Orange.
Yeah.
And allegedly Kubrick watched this film, and this was the one that inspired him to cast Malcolm McDowell in that movie. And McDowell wasn't sure how to play that character, and he called up Lindsay Anderson, and Lindsay Anderson said, Malcolm, this is how you play that part. There's a scene of you in a close-up in If, where you open the doors to the gymnasium to be beaten. You get a close-up. I said, that's right. He said, remember that. Remember how you smiled, or that ironic smile. That's how you play the part of Alex. And Malcolm McDowell said, God, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. That's all I needed. And that was enough of a brilliant piece of direction for an actor.
Yeah, I mean, and you can see that because he does come into that scene where he knows these guys are going to beat him badly, and he's just like, let's do it. Like he's ready for it, and even in a weird way eager, because
that's a rough sequence though, huh?
It is. I mean, and you get the impact of it and the sense of how these other boys, the whips, are treating him so poorly and really taking this glee in causing him harm. But he too takes some sort of glee in knowing that he's gotten under their skin where they feel like they have to do this to him.
Right. He's always kind of subverting them. Josh, one of the reviews mentioned Jean Vigo, Zero de Conduit, a 1933 film, was big influence on that. Did you see that movie, Josh?
I have not. I mean, that's a very famous, it also takes place at a boarding school. It's a very famous film, but I have not watched it, but I'm sure it's something I should check out.
Anderson says seeing Vigo's film gave us the idea and also the confidence to proceed with that kind of scene structure that we devised for the first part of the film, particularly.
Well, we'll come back and talk more of our general thoughts on If.
We already did.
Yeah, we'll get a little more. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 1969, we're talking about Cannes Film Festival Palme d'Or winner If, and we've said a lot about this film already. But was there any particular favorite moment or aspect that stuck out to you, Jason, that we haven't brought up yet?
Yeah, I mean, and this isn't a surprise because when you get these movies like this, and we've talked about a lot of them, right? When they get off campus, it's a fun break, right? And at one point, they kind of commandeer a motorcycle, right? A motorbike, and they go into town. And McDowell has this crazy fantasy of sleeping with the barista, that's a strange sequence too. Another black and white one that comes out of nowhere. But I did like the break. Obviously, the stuff with McDowell and his two buddies, I think, that's the strongest part. But the whole thing was just like confusing and enthralling in the same way I felt. Like it drew me in the more I was confused by it. So.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I think that barista or cafe worker or whatever character who doesn't have a name, played by Christine Noonan, is certainly one of the baffling elements of this film. And it's interesting. You say like they get a break, right? They leave. It's Mick and one of his two kind of friends / associates, and they go off and they steal this motorcycle and then they go to the cafe. I wouldn't have characterized any of that as fun per se. I mean, to me, that whole sequence shows that even away from this environment of the school, they're still kind of like vicious and feral. And that's how they encounter this woman, even though she ends up kind of matching their energy in that fantasy-ish sequence or whatever. And then we see her later in the finale when they decide to murder everyone. And although I wonder, again, it's like, is she meant to really be there, or are they just imagining her there? And we don't really know. But to me, that break was not fun rather than it was an extension of how twisted these guys have become in the school.
That's fun. I do think she was there in the finale. She's the one who ends up shooting the headmaster. So to me, that's a real moment, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's assuming that you take that finale as a whole also as real.
Right. And I think that's fair, that whole sequence. Honestly, you could say everything from that military drill, which is, there's a lot of parallels that I draw with Kubrick here. Oh, Lucky Man and Clockwork are very similar, but that sequence is kind of very Full Metal Jacket-ish, right? And everything. And I mean, you could almost say everything from that moment on might be, fantastical.
Right. And I mean, I think he builds to that where you start the movie and it seems like it's grounded and realistic, right? It's almost this like slice of life thing about life in this boarding school. And especially because we have so many characters and we do follow a lot of them, not just Mick and his friends, but like you were saying, the younger characters. I mean, it starts out and the first character that we see in terms of like following what he's doing is this younger kid who's a new student and they're showing him around and here's where you put your stuff and all that. And it seems like, oh, maybe this is going to be the main character. And then he almost completely disappears as the movie goes along. But it seems like this more realistic thing, especially if it's inspired by the screenwriter's own experience. And then gradually you get these little flashes of like, wait, what the hell was that? Right. And it builds toward it being completely surreal.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, I'm just like that. That's why baffling is such a good word. I'm like, I was liking it. And then the more strange it got, I'm like, what is happening? And it just, like I said, it just kept drawing me in. And, this is McDowell's first performance on film. Man, this guy, I don't think he gets enough credit. I mean, he's iconic because of Clockwork, but he's such an interesting actor. I was talking to you about this yesterday. Like, everything seems like he's receiving, like he's always receiving everything for the first time, right? Everything's, whimsical and charming, and not charming, but like everything is just, he's so open to everything. And I think as an actor, that's really important. And it comes across in every performance, from this to Clockwork to Oh Lucky Man, maybe not in Thelma that we talked about recently, but I don't think he gets the credit as an actor as much because maybe his iconic role has kind of placed him as simply that.
Right. And it came so early on. And then even though he's done so many things since then, people still remember him mainly for that one thing. But yeah, I think you're right. And I think watching this movie, once he shows up, it's easy to see, oh, this guy is a star. And as I was saying, we have so many different characters at the beginning and we're not really sure who we're meant to follow. And once Mick arrives, you're like, oh, this guy, this is the guy we want to watch. This is the person who we're going to pay attention to. And that's not just because Anderson is focusing on him more. It's because McDowell has that charisma and is commanding your attention as a viewer.
Right. And I'm sure if you read the screenplay today, the note would be like, why isn't the main character there for the first 15 minutes? But I think that's what he's talking about, building that tapestry and showcasing the entire school and the system before we meet him. And for whatever reason, it worked for me. So, I like that. The whips, like you were saying, we get all these different segments and there's full segments of just those four, like, bastards, I guess we would call them, right? Like the meanies who do the whipping, the whips. And those are like, again, like they come in and out and you're like, huh, wait, am I following these guys? Wait, are they the bad guys? Or they just, it's all just like a strange soup, Josh, that for some reason, when you throw the ingredients together, it tastes delicious.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, again, it didn't quite fit together as much. And those scenes with the whips, they're just not as interesting, or you're not as curious about what they're doing as the scenes with Mick and his friends. And Mick, of course, is a more compelling character than his two other friends. But when you've got them together and they're scheming because they're the rebels or whatever, you're more intrigued about, hey, what's going on? How are they going to push back against this environment? And the whips are just assholes, and they're meant to be, but there's not layers to their characters per se. So when we're seeing them arguing again about like, which one of them is going to get to fuck this young boy, it's not as, I think, quite as compelling. But Roundtree, who is the main, like sort of the head whip or whatever, I mean, he is a good villain as the movie goes on, you do get to hate him. And as you're saying in the finale, that's something now that is more uncomfortable for us to watch. But at the same time, the idea that Roundtree is going to get murdered is appealing, I think.
So I think with the whips, like, yeah, I think for my guess is from the Anderson standpoint is like, hey, if we show them on their own, it will give more sympathy to our main characters as we see their interactions more. We've talked about that sequence. Basically, the whips decide that Mick and his friends are like, too they're standing up to authority too much. So they decide like, hey, we're gonna cane them, which they get teacher approval.
Right. And I think that's one of those scenes where it's clear that the teachers have no real power or don't care, right? They have to ask as a formality. And the teacher is like, well, we don't want too much physical punishment, but, do what you think is necessary or whatever. Basically, it's just like, you have this authority to do whatever, and I'm just going to sign off on it.
Well, yeah, I think that goes back to, and maybe that's one of the successes of the movie, showcasing all these institutional elements that are hopefully not around anymore.
Oh, the corporal punishment, theoretically not, but the hierarchy and the lording of power over each other and the bullying and all of that.
Yeah. I don't think that's just, fancy private school. So that's probably
true.
Everywhere.
But I mean, this is definitely like the idea of the whips, right? The giving of special authority to certain students that allows them to mistreat other students. It wouldn't surprise me if that kind of system exists, even if they're no longer allowed to cane people.
Do you think we should bring caning back in schools, Josh?
No, I do not think that. But you wanted to talk about that particular sequence where they cane him, right?
Well, it's uncomfortable. Like, I mean, you kind of see what's going to happen, right? Because, they basically tell him what's going to happen. And Mick, while he goes in, insults them, like, as opposed to pleading his case, he just tells him like Roundtree, what a miserable failure he's going to be in life and how worthless he is. And so the whips cane the other guys, and I think they give him like 4 lashes each. And then Mick gets in and, maybe they stop at 10 and they show it from different angles. They show it from off screen. It's very uncomfortable. And then what makes it most uncomfortable is after it's done, they shake hands and, it's like a fair play type thing, right? Like, oh yeah, no, this is just what had to be done, or this is what we accepted was done. And now we'll shake hands and move on like gentlemen, right? Which of course they don't, but it's a strange way of showcasing, like you said, manners or something like that. So.
Right. I mean, I think that's the idea here, is that this British tradition, they have this sense of themselves as being honorable and having manners, or there's a certain way things are done, but it's showing how like barbaric that really is. And I like that moment too, because we see Mick as very defiant, right? And the way that plays out is the other 2 guys go in first and we hear them being lashed, but we never see inside. We just see Mick and whichever other one is waiting outside. And then we finally go in when Mick is going in, and he has this sense of self-confidence. And that's when he opens the door and he has that expression on his face that McDowell took forward into A Clockwork Orange. And we're kind of on his side, right? Even though he's not really a good person either, but we're on his side versus Roundtree. And then as it goes along, when you get to that point that you're mentioning where he has to shake his hand and say thank you, it's this sort of moment of defeat, right? That Roundtree maybe has broken Mick in some way by doing this.
And he didn't, though, Josh.
No, because but he maybe he did, because either that whole end sequence is just a fantasy, and so Mick has retreated into his imagination of how he would get revenge, right? Or he is so disconnected from reality that his only response to having been caned is to murder everyone in the whole school.
Right. I mean, that's what's interesting, is like we keep coming up with different points and counterpoints about this movie. Josh, the movie was filmed at Anderson's alma mater, Cheltenham College. The original title was called Crusaders. And Josh, the screenplay was originally given to Nicholas Ray to direct, but he had a nervous breakdown. That would have been a totally different film.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a few Nicholas Ray movies, and I don't know that he really indulges in that kind of surrealism. I feel like his version would have been a more grounded, and I don't know how many of those surreal touches are in the screenplay versus.
Right, that's what I was thinking too. Like, is it just like we're filming it and we're figuring it out type thing?
Right. So I could have seen Nicholas Ray do an interesting version. I mean, a very different version, but an interesting version of this nonetheless.
I have one quote for you, Josh, from Malcolm McDowell on Lindsay Anderson. I know that he was in love with Richard Harris, the star of Anderson's first feature, This Sporting Life. I am sure that it was the same with me and Albert Finney and the rest. it wasn't a physical thing, but I suppose he always fell in love with his leading men. He would always pick someone who was unattainable because he was heterosexual.
I mean, there's definitely some of that sublimated into what we've been talking about with the gay. I mean, it's almost, I don't even want to call it subtext again, because it's very blatant, but to be able to explore that. And this is a context maybe where you can depict that in a certain way without drawing attention to, your personal point of view or something, perhaps.
Yeah. But so that sequence that we're talking about with the gymnast, right, where the students watching him, I mean, it was like almost shot like a Calvin Klein commercial or a Chris Isaac Wicked Game video. It's like, it's really stylish. It's really effective in showing the teenage lust that they have for each other, I'd say.
Right. And then you see them later in bed together, and not like, in a sexual way necessarily when you see them. It's just as we're kind of panning across various characters in bed after lights out or whatever, but it's not hard to put things together there, I think.
Yeah. So no, they definitely did sex, I think.
Yes, they did. So should we talk more about the finale? I mean, I think as we're saying, this is something maybe now, again, it's interesting in that Penelope Houston review where she kind of lightheartedly says, oh, sure, everyone imagined murdering people at their school. But, we view that differently now. I mean, how does that, did you find it distasteful? Is it, I mean, it's meant to be kind of jarring and unpleasant, but what was your reaction to it?
It was wild. It kind of like escalated very quickly, so to speak. In a way, it kind of reminded me of the finale of Animal House with the parade and all the craziness going on there. But, yeah, I mean, I just thought like, he's already established this anything goes kind of attitude for the film. So, if it jumped up like 5 notches instead of 1, that's what it is. I mean, it's just sad that it's not really satire anymore.
Right. And I think that's what some of those reviews are saying. And it is brutal. But to me, one of the things too is that like, for most of the movie, you're thinking Mick and his friends are sympathetic, right? They're being singled out, they're being bullied, and this institution is really kind of terrible, and they're the only ones who are rebelling against it in really very, very small ways, like having their hair slightly longer than it's supposed to be or whatever.
Growing a mustache.
Right, which he like hides and shaves off because he's obviously aware that he would get in trouble for it, and he has to do it secretly. But I think one of the things is that sequence shows like, oh, these guys are terrible too. Like, this is not the proper response to this, right? Just to slaughter all of these people, including many of whom have nothing. If he went and murdered Roundtree or whatever and had a confrontation, you might root for him. But all of these other people who have nothing to do with their mistreatment necessarily. And maybe you could say, well, they're sort of murdering the institution. But I think to me, one of the effects of that sequence is to show that there's no one good here. There's no one worth rooting for here.
Except the headmaster who implores them to stop.
Yeah, and keeps we didn't even mention the reverend or whatever who's in a drawer for some reason.
That was so weird.
Yeah.
That was just insane. Like, but again, I'm sure he had a reason. Anderson must have had a reason for it. Like, what is he saying? Like, you're better at that than I am. Like, is the Reverend just, there for the convenience of the institution? Is he just, a pawn for whenever they want to use him? It was very strange. But let's get Dave's opinion, because I know he's pro mass violence. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, I don't know. I liked the idea of this movie. This is one of those where it's like, I think I understood what the director was going for, but I just don't think it really kind of came together in any way that was really enjoyable to watch. Like, and the reputation of the violence of this movie, it was just kind of lost on me. I don't know if it's because of it being an older film or because I was expecting the kind of violence that happens in that last 10 minutes earlier in the movie, and it just kind of didn't happen at any point. But I think I was waiting for violence, and all I got was like kind of shitty behavior, basically.
I told you he's pro-violence.
I mean, I think what's effective about that is that it builds, right? Is that it goes from like what you're saying, shitty behavior, that's something that we might think, okay, well, this is bad, but this is what we imagine would happen in a place like this, right?
Mhm.
And then suddenly you get to a point where it's like, whoa, this is not the typical thing that we imagine. I mean, sadly now we expect it more, but it's still not typical. It's still not like, oh, that happens everywhere and that's just the way it goes kind of thing. So, I mean, I think it's effective and jarring and shocking, which is what it's meant to be, because it suddenly jumps to that level at the end.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. I just think that for a movie whose reputation is its violence, that it doesn't really happen.
But that's not
way.
the film's fault, right? That's just the conversation around it. And I think in 1969, this would have been shocking violence.
Yeah, and I think it's still, as you're watching the film in the context of it, it does still feel shocking, or at least it did to me. So should we rate this out of 5 canes? 5 canings, Josh?
Yeah. Yes, 3.5 canings for me. It's a baffling film. That's the word we keep coming back to, but he's an interesting filmmaker, right? He's not afraid to take things to and over the edge, and that's kind of what drew me. And a lot of the time we talk about, and Dave and I a lot of the time talk about it on Piecing It Together, like, hey, if you're going to go for it, just go for it, right? And I think whether you like this movie, hate it, love it, you can't deny that Lindsay Anderson went for it. He went all in on it, right?
Yeah, I agree. And I think as we're talking about it, I'm thinking, there's a lot more interesting stuff here. I give it a 3 out of 5, although maybe I'd bump it up to 3.5 because it does seem like there's a lot going on. I'm with Dave in that it didn't all come together for me. And I spent a lot of the movie just kind of thinking, what? And not always in a good way.
Wait, you were thinking, what? Not if?
Right.
Yeah, that's true.
So, so for me, it didn't all really work, but I definitely respect and appreciate that he's going for it, as you say. So, Dave, how would you rate this?
But Josh, before Dave rates it, I want you to know if you're willing to bump it to 3.5, I'll let you watch me do gymnastics.
Oh, that, you know what? For comedic purposes, I would like to do that, really.
What an offer. Wow. Do I get an offer to bump mine to 3.5? Because I'm also...
You rated it 3.5 on Letterboxd.
No, it was a 3 on Letterboxd.
Jason keeps misconstruing his ratings of movies. So you're going with 3, Dave?
I'm going with 3, yes.
All right, that's fair.
All right, we'll come back in a moment and talk about the legacy of If. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 1969, we're talking about Cannes Film Festival Palme d'Or winner If from Lindsay Anderson. And as we've said here, the main sort of legacy of this is this collaboration among Lindsay Anderson, Malcolm McDowell, and the screenwriter David Sherwin on these 2 other films with the character of Mick Travis, Oh Lucky Man, and Britannia Hospital. And you liked Oh Lucky Man, Jason?
Yeah, it's so indulgent and unnecessarily long, but it's just like there's so much interesting and weird stuff in there. I'm just like, all right, I'll go with it. I wish it wasn't 3 hours long, but I mean, I just accept Lindsay Anderson for who he was, Josh. And he cameos in that film. And, Josh, I am sure you found the same research. He uses so many of the same actors in both Oh Lucky Man and Britannia Hospital, but never, like we said, references who they were in the past movies. It's like he's trying to, confuse and off-put you purposely, but not in a bad way.
So do you think you'll check out Britannia Hospital too?
Yes, I will. I was almost going to start it last night, but that and This Sporting Life, which has an amazing reputation as a classic, would be the next 2. We've talked about British film and, kind of some of the movements and, none of us are as educated on it as some other film movements from around the world, but this made me want to dig deeper for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I'll watch Oh Lucky Man.
You'll watch it.
Oh, yes. Or you'll cane me if I don't. But I mean, Anderson is an important, British filmmaker and part of this British New Wave. I think the Mick Travis films are certainly what he's best known for, but he had, a long career, although he's not as prolific as a feature film director aside from those. Like I said, I've seen his film The Whales of August, which is from 1987, and very, very different. This kind of, small scale drama about a pair of sisters with Bette Davis and Lillian Gish, and based on a play. And Anderson also was even more prolific as a stage director. And so it's not surprising that he was recruited to do this stage adaptation in addition to directing plays. On stage, he directed a lot of TV sort of versions of plays. He directed a lot of documentary short films and a concert documentary featuring Wham.
Oh, no, but that's
nice.
That's Josh. You have to get all the facts right on that. So that was on Wham's tour to China in 1986. And when Anderson cut it, he only put 4 Wham songs in the entire concert documentary. And George Michael fired him because he was like, what? This is not what we asked for. But he should have known it wasn't going to be what they asked for when they asked Lindsay Anderson to give it, to film it for them and everything.
Right. I wonder, is the Anderson cut of that Wham documentary available versus the George Michael cut?
That would be amazing just to see that. Josh, they did write a proper sequel to this but they never were able to do it because Anderson died. But there's so many weird little things about this, like a film of the memoir Going Mad in Hollywood and Life with Lindsay Anderson, written by David Sherwin. They were going to film that. Michael Winterbottom was going to direct it, and McDowell was going to play Lindsay Anderson. And that seems like that would have been a perfect, weirdly unique fit.
Right. Yeah. And unfortunately, Anderson, as you said, passed away before they made that regular sequel. But the last thing he made was something that kind of sounds like what you were describing, was like a mockumentary sort of TV special that he made about his own life, featuring himself as himself. So certainly someone who was always self-reflexive, right? And playing with the idea of what is a film and, what is the construction of a story that we see here even early in his career.
And McDowell has a one-man show about Anderson that I know is available as kind of, like a documentary at this point, or like a one-man show. But you can watch it on film is what I meant. That's terrible English, but Dave, let's keep it in. I want him to know I'm not perfect.
I mean, McDowell, as we said, maybe doesn't get the credit he deserves, but is still like a big star and incredibly prolific. And in a way, maybe that's one of the problems, because he's one of these actors who clearly just wants to work and he'll take whatever he's offered. So, he's got a lot of really famous roles. Of course, A Clockwork Orange, the most famous, but Time After Time and Caligula, which is, I think, about to get a big new restoration. Cat People. I always remember him as the villains in Star Trek Generations and Tank Girl, as well as for his roles as the Dr. Loomis in Rob Zombie's Halloween movies, which I love. And we might have talked about him when we did our episode on Brandon Cronenberg's Antiviral.
Mm-hmm. We might have. I don't remember. He's, obviously does a ton of video game work. Did you, you brought up the Paul Schrader review. Did you mention Cat People right there, Josh?
I did, yeah. So he worked with Paul Schrader later on.
Right. It's a strange thing. Anderson has an Oscar for Best Documentary Short in 1954, Josh.
Yeah, he did a lot of those documentary shorts, especially early in his career. Malcolm McDowell still working extensively. As we said, he was just in Thelma, which was the June Squibb film about the grandma going after her scammer, and he plays the scammer. And he's always welcome to see, but he definitely is in a lot of terrible B movies. And again, we'll take whatever he's given. I saw him, perhaps the saddest Malcolm McDowell moment that I recall is that he was in this conservative sort of satire about Bernie Sanders called Free Lunch Express that I reviewed in my VOD column. And it was like, what are you doing, Malcolm McDowell? Did you read the script? Why are you here? And that was kind of a sad moment.
It seems so opposite of the message of the roles he was taking in movies like this and Clockwork.
Yeah. And I want to believe that, again, he just did it for the paycheck because he'll do whatever and not because he wanted to support this characterization of Bernie Sanders. But there he was nonetheless.
But I think Josh, the point here is what a piece of crap you are if you're giving people free lunches who are hungry. What assholes.
Right. Yeah. Don't watch that movie. He doesn't play Bernie Sanders, but
don't help people in need, right? That's terrible of you.
Yeah, it's the idea I think is that Bernie Sanders himself is a freeloader. Is that the perspective of that film? But I shouldn't be giving any promotion to that movie, really.
And yet you've given it a lot.
Right. No, I mean, my point was just that McDowell is, I mean, and that's one that I happen to have seen, but you look through his filmography, especially lately, and there's all these obscure titles, and I'm sure most, if not all of them, are very bad. But you know, you want a big name in your movie, he's one of those guys who's available to show up for a day or two on your low budget film and play a part so that you can have his name on your poster.
But he's still good. Like, I mean, he was good in Thelma. Like he's, you know, we're in this landscape where everything is so different, right? You know, who knows what royalties are with streaming versus back in the day, straight to video, you probably made a lot more money. So maybe he just has to keep working.
Yeah. I mean, and that's okay. So, I mean, other actors in this film, no one else a big star. Robert Swann, Richard Warwick, a couple of the other main boys, working character actors in various British film and TV. David Wood, who plays one of Mick's two friends, went on to become this apparent, like, beloved playwright for children who did all these stage adaptations of children's literature and is still alive and is still putting those together. So that's an interesting kind of shift for his career.
I think, like we said, they're all, first of all, it was sad reading about a lot of these guys because a lot of them died young. And then Arthur Lowe, Josh, who played the housemaster, Mr. Kemp, won a BAFTA for Oh Lucky Man for Best Supporting Actor. And we might be talking about him a little later this season if we get to a cult classic known as The Bed-Sitting Room.
I think we are. A little preview of what's to come. Christine Noonan, who plays the girl who doesn't have a name, didn't have much of an acting career after this. A few credits in the 70s and one or two in the 90s. As you said, a lot of these people, unfortunately, died young. I mean, Malcolm McDowell still around, still working, and David Wood also still around, still writing plays, but many of these people not around anymore.
Right. But you can see him in other Lindsay Anderson movies.
Yes.
They live on.
So I was just thinking of, you know, in the theme of the sort of breaking it apart as Dave would do, so a handful of movies that this made me think of. I mean, I mentioned Elephant that we've done an episode on, and that certainly was one that came to mind a lot. A film that I really like called Sella and the Spades from a few years ago that is also set at a kind of an elite school and uses this surreal tone to show you the conflicts between the various cliques. And weirdly, I just did a big article on Chucky movies, and so I had rewatched Child's Play 3, which is set at a military school. And the bit in this movie where they take real bullets and put them in the guns where they're supposed to be doing this war games exercise, so suddenly they have real bullets, is I have to think that Don Mancini, creator of Chucky, had seen this film because Chucky does the exact same thing in Child's Play 3 and replaces the paintball bullets with real bullets in this war game exercise that the characters are going through and it causes the characters, some of them, to like murder each other.
Yeah, I definitely will stick with the holdovers, whether you want to look at the nostalgia aspect or not. I thought, like I said, that Wonder Boys Breakfast Club, huge Breakfast Club vibes here, you know, with the angst of the kids and all that stuff and how they don't fit in. So, yeah, there's plenty of great ones out there.
I want to throw one into Class of 1984. I just watched that recently at the Sin City Horror Club screening, and just a whole bunch of raucous teens taking over a school, basically. Definitely reminded me of the no adults having any authority.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of that. I mean, movies don't always go that extreme. I mean, I thought of Rock and Roll High School, which is a favorite of mine as well.
Sure.
So this is clearly influential. And the range of movies that we just mentioned, they're all very different kinds of films. So definitely something that a lot of filmmakers have taken from over the years. So anything else you want to mention on the legacy of this, Jason?
Nope.
All right. Well, that's it. And that's this episode of Awesome Movie Year. You can cane us on social media and online.
Sure you can, Josh. Why don't you head on over to awesomemovieyear.com, Awesome Movie Year on Facebook and Instagram, Awesome Movie Pod on the social platform that feels like you're being caned every time you go onto it. Josh, I'm Jason Harris Comedy, or J Harris Comedy, plus Eat This Comedy. We're doing big things. Find me on Letterboxd and go for Jason.
I am at joshbellhateseverything.com. I finally just recently posted one thing there from 8 months ago that I meant to post. So that's exciting, but a lot of old stuff there. At Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook. I am at Signal Bleed on that unfortunate ex-Twitter platform, as well
where
as
they love that Bernie Sanders movie.
I'm sure they would. Yeah, sadly, they probably would. As well as at Signal Bleed on Blue Sky and on Letterboxd. If you're on Letterboxd and you watch this movie or any of the movies that we talk about, tag your review Awesome Movie Year. We'd love to know what you think about the movies we cover on the show. And you can listen to our producer, David Rosen's awesome podcast, Piecing It Together.
Check out Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts and follow us on social media at PiecingPod.
Jason, what's in our next episode?
Josh, we're going to a documentary pick. It's 1969. This is one of the most famous documentaries ever. It's the Maysles brothers. We're back to our friends the Maysles with Salesman.
So tune in next time for Salesman, and thanks for listening to Awesome Movie Year.
Thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year. Make sure to follow Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, at Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, and at Awesome Movie Year on Instagram. And if you like the show, review us and rate us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.